All all right. Hey, I am here with the Resource Global team. We just finished spending a couple hours just reviewing how our cohort, and then also just really be able to look through what do we have to do for this next year. Hey, Noah, even as you oversaw our Chicago cohort, what do you think went well? What were some of the strengths of our cohort this year, and what were some of the weaknesses or things that we have to improve on for our cohorts this coming year?
Yeah, Tommy, I think one of the strengths for the Chicago cohort that we really enjoyed, we had about like 20, 25 cohort members, which was quite a lot. And
Yeah.
I think it developed into a really strong community. I know a lot of them enjoyed being, these are all Christian professionals living and working in Chicago, and they enjoyed getting to know people from different churches, different work experiences, and also coming together, listening to various speakers, global speakers, and growing in that way, and also being mentored by their mentors in Chicago too. So they really enjoyed kind of the holistic community mentorship and learning aspect of the cohort. I think one of the weaknesses though was that we didn't have as clear expectations in the beginning of the cohort, and they had a hard time attending various meetings. They weren't quite sure what they were getting out of it. And so I think we lacked a really clear goal. And so I know that's something that we want to improve upon on year two, and also maybe make the cohorts a little smaller. A lot of them also, though they had a good community, they only knew about 4 or 5 people, but there was over 25 people. And so trying to find a more tight-knit community, making the group a lot less to maybe 12 is something that we're looking forward to next year as well.
And Noah, in some sense, like you said, is we felt like 20 was huge. So 12, like you said, is a good number for us for discussions happening. And even for this first year's cohort, we did struggle in terms of, okay, what is it that we wanted to accomplish? What are the outcomes? So we're trying to refine that after the first year. We have a lot more results. Actually, going to you, Sarah, as we continue on, is we spent a lot of time bringing a lot of teachers. We brought in Andy Crouch. We brought in Catherine Leary Alsdorf. We brought in Daryl Bach. But in some sense, we actually felt like, let's move away from the teachers this year and spend more time in community. Can you talk a little bit about that, being a teacher yourself?
Yeah, sure. I think community is a really big aspect of what we're trying to do with the cohort, so that it's not just top-down learning and like a speaker talking about you need to do this, you need to do this. I think even as a teacher, knowing that students and just as people, we learn not just by hearing, but then also by doing and engaging in the material. And so being able to give our cohort members a way to do that in smaller groups, being facilitated by our cohort alumni is going to be hopefully a really great way for them to build community, interact, as well as get to know each other on a more personal level, and to be able to have that kind of more personal accountability. I know in Jakarta, that's going to be huge, and it's going to be something that will be really beneficial for future cohort members.
Yeah. And Bobby, one of the things that the people listening to this video may not understand is we actually track every single month surveys to show exactly how our cohorts were responding. You actually kept a lot of those surveys, and you actually measured because we want to see what the impact was. What did you see during those surveys that really helped you determine where we need to go?
Yeah, I think our 3 biggest measurements were the applicability of the teaching session, what kind of new understandings they came away with from those teaching sessions, and how likely they were to recommend those sessions to friends or colleagues. So each session we were kind of able to see what went well. Was it new material that was presented well? Was it applicable to them? And so it was able to give us a good measure of how things were going, and then based on our follow-up, how we can kind of change those things moving forward.
Got it. Like, for instance, Sarah, you actually mentioned specifically with Jakarta, Jackson Crum, pastor of Park Community Church, actually had one of the highest ratings. Why was he so popular, and why was he get such strong ratings?
Yeah, I think Jackson was really impactful because when he was speaking, it wasn't just something that was head knowledge, but it was something that all of the cohort members could relate to in a ministry context as well as in a work context. He talked about different mistakes that people make in discipleship. And so again, that might not be something that you can think translates directly to the workplace, but I think with where a lot of our cohort members are at this past year from the Jakarta cohort, they could really relate to it because a lot of them manage people and are trying to raise up future leaders within their workplace. So again, this was something that they could interact with personally. This was something that they were able to learn about and then live out. So it was really applicable. And I think that that's one of the reasons why they really enjoyed that specific speaker.
Yeah, let me do a couple more questions. Hey, Jim, as we look at Chicago and Jakarta, we've just finished up the first year. We're now meeting. What's next for Resource Global as we continue to expand?
Yeah. So this coming up is year 2 of our cohorts. So we went through an introductory year with both Indonesia and Chicago. We feel like we've learned a lot to be able to expand and improve our program for this following year. I think one of the things that we're going to be doing is really looking at a couple of other countries who have expressed interest into just establishing a cohort in their country as well too. We're creating what we call exploration stages, where we're working with a funder to be able to raise a certain amount of money for a team to go out there to help them understand the resource model, to be able to understand the culture and get to know some of the people in those countries that we're potentially looking at, and then to be able to take somewhere between 6 to 12 months to see if this is something that would be suitable for us to kind of move into. So the next country we're looking at is Kenya, and so we'll be sending a team out there in the fall to be able to work with a couple of the leaders out there as well.
Yeah. Hey, can you also talk a little bit? I've had to leave, and you've taken my place to oversee the day-to-day operations. Going forward, post-September, what do you think the leadership structure of Resource Global will look like?
Yeah, so Tommy, I think with the new structure, Tommy will remain the president of the organization. I'm going to really take over the chief operating role, which is managing the day-to-day operations and helping us to make sure that we're meeting all of our metrics and goals, and then also some of the funding goals associated with it as well too. Tommy's going to remain the more outward focused and the face of the organization, whereas my role will be to make sure that operationally we're meeting our goals as well too.
Yeah. And Noah, let me ask you a question is, I think a lot of times people are going to say, well, okay, after the cohort, what are the outcomes of the cohort? What would you say it would be?
Yeah, I think that's one big question that we've had going forward as we move to kind of year 2, and as Jimmy shared a little bit. I think some of the outcomes we're looking for is that each cohort member through the beginning of the time to the end will be challenged and asked to create what we call kind of an action step plan. And so as they learn a foundation of what the gospel means for them, for their community, and for their city, to then see kind of where their passions lie, where their work experience lies, and to kind of figure out what their passion is, and then kind of gear that towards a step of what it looks like to how to impact your city, your workplace, your community, even your own family, and how that would project them to make the gospel actualized. And we'll be kind of tracking them throughout the cohort. We want to kind of see these outcomes look, whether it's starting, it could be starting a nonprofit. It could be being more intentional in a certain aspect of your workplace. It could be being more intentional with your neighbors in your city and creating some relationships, or maybe trying to meet a need there. All these kinds of things we want to kind of introduce to them and try to get them thinking in a community together so they can impact their city and be global leaders, and hopefully have that reproducible throughout the years. And so that's kind of the main outcome. It's not going to be a cookie cutter kind of example. It's going to be an example that would be formalized to their experience, to their stories, to their passions and their work experiences. And so we kind of hope to do that. It's a vast task, but we also know that the gospel compels us to do all these sorts of things. And so for each person, it just looks differently. So that's kind of hopefully the main outcome we'll be aiming for in the next year.
2 last questions, Bobby, Sarah, and then we're going to wrap up. Bobby, working in a young organization like Resource Global, and even going to different cities where there's really no processes established, how difficult is it just starting something new?
Yeah, it's definitely difficult, but sometimes it's a lot of fun. We're able to take ownership of different things that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do in a larger company or organization. So that ability to just kind of make things your own is there. At the same time, there aren't that many processes already put in place. So just the difficulty of creating those yourself is definitely there.
And last thing, Sarah, you've been back home now for about 2 or 3 weeks from Indonesia. As you look back, what's one memory that you have of your time with Resource Global and even your time in Indonesia?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. I think one really impactful memory is when we were able to gather together for our final cohort dinner. It was hosted by one of our local board members, Dr. Suparno, and it was just really a great time to be able to share and look back at all the things that God has been doing this past year. And I think sometimes for me, it's really helpful to think back and just to remember all of the praises and to be able to collectively see just what he's doing in individuals' lives. I think, day to day, it could be really difficult to remember that because of all the difficulties or all the pushbacks that we might feel, but really being able to see that what we're doing is worth it, that what we're doing in the long run can have long-term impact. And I feel like it's something that's really exciting to be part of, just to see how God is transforming even the city of Jakarta through these few individuals. So definitely going to be remembering that and cherishing that as a meaningful time for when I was in Indonesia.
Thank you. Hey, this seemed to work well. If people like it and hearing from the team members, we should do this more often. Thanks, guys.